Hello everyone, I am Nathan P. Butler, and this is my Star Wars vlog, the voice of reason or lack thereof, as I've taken to calling it. Welcome. This time, we're going to take a look at a topic that has been coming up actually quite a bit on one of the podcasts I'm involved with, Star Wars Beyond the Films, over at StarWarsReport.com. And because of that, and a certain response to that issue by someone who was also recently a topic of that show, I thought it might be interesting to get into the meat of a particular situation here on the vlog. First, though, let me say a big thank you to the ILM visual effects team working on Rogue One. You may recall that a while back I did a trailer reaction or a teaser reaction video for the first Rogue One teaser. And then it turns out that the ILM team took a bunch of those reactions from all over the web and made a huge montage of them that they then watched and recorded their own reactions to. And a little tiny piece of my reaction video wound up on their video, and they seemed to like my comment about the Star Destroyers. Take a look. We have some extremely detailed Star Destroyers. Not sure if those are models or if those are CG. If they're CG, they're fantastic.
I mean, that looks like a model.
I love it when my confusion over whether something is CG or a model is cause for applause. So thank you very much for taking the time to put that together, ILM. It's great to see how you all are reacting to the fans. And thank you for including a little snippet of my reaction video within your reaction video. So now I think you're getting here with me saying thank you, a reaction to a reaction to a reaction to a teaser. So we should probably stop there. This brings us to the main topic of this vlog, though, and that is the Continue Legends movement. Specifically, the billboard that was recently put up for Continuing Legends, and on top of that, the primary focus here, Chuck Wendig's response to it. So first, a tiny bit of background here. Those who know me probably already know this, but I am a huge Star Wars fan, obviously. I have been a reader of the Star Wars Expanded Universe, aka Legends, since 1992. My first Star Wars Legends book was Dark Force Rising, which I picked up alongside a paperback of Heir to the Empire. So I started reading in about 1992, went back and picked up Heir to the Empire, eventually went back, and I now pretty much own all the different Star Wars books of like the novels and the original stories. I don't do like the step into reading books or anything like that. Don't do the RPG books and things like that, but the adult novels, the younger reader novels with new stories and whatnot, all the Star Wars comics, and so on and so on. It's a huge collection, which at some point I'm sure I'll walk around with the camera, except I just can't do it right now, given the way it's set up in the other room. So, big Star Wars reader. Actually, I think my first Star Wars EU of any kind, beyond the films, was this. This was the first Marvel Comics issue I ever picked up when I was a kid. It's beaten all to crap, which is why it's not in a cover or anything like that. But yeah, the introduction of the idea that you can have stories beyond just the Star Wars movies, for me, happened thanks to Marvel. Of course, over the years, since 1997, I've been compiling the Star Wars Timeline Gold, chronicling all these different things. It's about 3,000 pages, give or take now, with all these different legend stories chronicled, little odds and ends in the appendices, and now a new canon, which I've talked about here on the show before. The first post-Return of the Jedi novel in the new canon is this, Star Wars Aftermath by Chuck Wendig. Now, this is a book that was very divisive within the Star Wars fan community. I would like to think that on Star Wars Beyond the Films, when we did our review of this, which was me, Mark Hurleman, and a guest for that episode, Michael Morris, who's also the main guy with me as a co-host on Cloud City Casino, another StarWarsReport.com podcast, I think we did a fair review of this book. But in order to do it, we had to get some elephants in the room out of the way, or banthas in the room, perhaps, out of the way. We were able to do a fair review, but we had to get a few things out of the way. We had to get out of the way, for instance, the idea that there were certain expectations of what the first book post-Return of the Jedi would be in the new canon, and this was not even remotely what people expected. So there was an expectation versus reality thing. We had to get the expectations out of the way so we could talk about the reality in a fair way. We also had to put aside the writing style of the book to an extent. This is a book that's written in present tense and written in about 1/3 sentence fragments of what are supposedly sentences. We did a quick study of, I think it was like the prologue or whatever you want to call it, of that book, and it was basically 1/3 of the sentences weren't even remotely sentences. It's written in a way that's meant to give you sort of a flow of thought, give you a sense of momentum as you're reading, which sounds good when you're listening to it as an audiobook, but when you're reading it, if you have any sense of English grammar, it's actually more like feeling like you're reading a book written by a middle schooler who has failed basic English language class. That said, we got that out of the way. And there was another thing, and that was the hubbub around the book and the author's reaction to it. Around the time that this book was being released, it was getting a lot of criticism. Some complete BS, which is just ad hominem attacks and things like that, and some that were actually legitimate criticism. Criticisms of the writing style, criticisms of certain choices made by characters in the book, etc., etc. Things that you would get for any book. But there was an equally strong backlash to any criticism, which included Chuck Wendig in his social media presence and those who sort of played off of his comments as sort of this unified backlash to any criticism. And among that was the idea that, well, if you don't like the book, you're just a Legends lover, and you're never going to accept anything that's not Legends, so none of your criticisms are actually valid. You're just hating on it because you're a Legends lover. And then, of course, there's my favorite, which is, oh, the book includes some gay characters? That's the only reason you're criticizing. You may be saying you're criticizing something else. You may be criticizing the writing style or the present tense or the sentence fragments or something, but no. That's just a cover. See, you're a homophobe. You're a gay basher, but you don't want to come out and publicly gay bash or reveal yourself to be a homophobe or a bigot, so instead, you're going to criticize something else. But we can see through this, you homophobe. Yeah, a lot of negativity and just a mess, and he didn't handle it well on social media. He tended to sort of give back as good as he got and tended to do some things that personally, if I was sitting back behind the scenes at Lucasfilm or Delaware, I'd be saying, the hell is this guy doing? Just shut up and let them burn themselves out. You're going to give yourself a bad reputation among the readers, which will reflect on the brand. But it struck me at the time that it seemed as though Chuck Wendig, to some extent, is almost like Donald Trump. That is, Donald Trump before the last couple of months, where it seems like the two sides of his psyche have merged together and become something of an abomination. And that is that you hear people talk about Trump prior to him running for president, and that his business dealings and personal dealings and some of his charitable work and things like that, and they would say that Trump is a decent guy. But then you would see him on television, say it's on The Apprentice or on the news or whatever in the beginnings of the campaign, and he's out there throwing around the attacks. You know, Megyn Kelly's bleeding from her wherever because she asked a tough question, and Carly Fiorina, would you look at that face? Can you imagine that face is the face of the United States? Ugh. But no, I really meant demeanor. Demeanor, not that she was ugly. He would be basically abrasive, smart-assy, unpleasant to deal with, and would never take any blame for anything. Any criticism to anything he did that was untoward was simply because, well, you didn't understand it. You're too stupid to understand that when I said bleeding from her wherever, I meant her ears or her eyes or something. I certainly didn't mean her vagina. So you had sort of this Donald Trump that people said was decent, and the Donald, who was sort of the public persona that he had created that was basically a douchebag. And I think that's kind of what was happening with Chuck Wendig. Because you'd hear about him at conventions and professional dealings and such, and he seemed like a decent guy, a funny guy, the kind of guy you might want to sit down and have a coffee with. On the other hand, in social media, at least around the launch of the book, he was kind of doing the attacking, the no criticism is valid, therefore you are a Legends lover, etc., kind of getting into that whole thing, and basically coming off as a douchebag. At the time, I essentially deemed it as, if it's Donald Trump and the Donald, it's Chuck Wendig and the Chuck. And I was hoping that once things died down from Aftermath, maybe we'd see more of Chuck Wendig and less of the Chuck, and there'd be less abrasiveness within the social media circles where fans are interacting with authors. That said, I came out of the whole experience of reading Aftermath and seeing the hubbub around it with a very negative opinion of Chuck Wendig. Just overall, that this is a guy who I would hope would somehow, in a sense, show himself to be better than he was showing himself to be. But at the time, I didn't want to read anything else he had written. I didn't want to hear any of his opinions on just about anything, because anybody who would throw themselves in with the, well, you're just a homophobe, well, you're just a Legends lover type of thing, and attack fans over legitimate criticisms, I don't have time for. But then came the Continue Legends billboard. A group called Give Us Legends raised about $5,000 online to basically purchase a large billboard in the San Francisco area, with the idea being that it could be seen by Lucasfilm employees as a way of saying, hey guys, we really would like to see the Legends continuity continue. Look, see how much we care about it, that we would do this to bring it to your attention. The billboard actually said, Dear Lucasfilm, please continue the original expanded universe, the epic story that existed from 1976 through 2014. Thank you. And they gave the website www.giveuslegends.net. It was a non-abrasive, non-offensive, non-douchebaggy way of saying, hey, we'd like to see more Legends, and we'd like to call attention to that in a way that shows that we're willing to support this with our voice and, to some extent, with our dollars, because we did have to pay for the billboard. That, I think, is one of the more positive ways of seeing expression of the Continue Legends movement within fandom that I've seen in recent memory. A lot of times, instead, it's people jumping up and flooding websites or Facebook pages and such with essentially pro-Legends propaganda bashing anything Disney, rather than being able to do the intellectually honest thing and acknowledge goods and bads in each and really kind of give it a chance to kind of acknowledge reality. There are still people showing up from time to time on my Facebook pages for either Beyond the Films or the Star Wars Timeline Gold saying, the EU Legends is canon! Disney doesn't exist! Well, the Lucasfilm line is that canon is what counts and Legends isn't. It's like an alternate continuity kind of thing. And since they own the copyright, they own the franchise, they get to make that decision, not us. Any decisions we make, that's personal canon, fanon, that has no place in legitimate discussion over what is or is not canonical. That's Lucasfilm's call. This stuff isn't in public domain yet. They get to make that decision. So you've got a lot of this abrasiveness. And then you've got the whole issue of the people who are showing up at conventions shouting out spoilers for The Force Awakens as a way of protesting Legends being pushed aside. That really just pissed a lot of people off. And you had websites getting attacked for not being vocal enough about loving Legends. And again, I love the Legends continuity. Again, I grew up with it. I chronicled it for years and still am chronicling it as it grows in tiny amounts on the Star Wars Timeline Gold. I wrote for it, for God's sake. Twice, technically, if you count the contributions to the Essential Atlas. I love the Legends continuity. I also acknowledge reality, and that's not canon at this point. Canon is a different thing that the story group is guiding. But I'd like to see the idea of Legends continuing someday, and I think there's a good way to go about it and a bad way to go about trying to bring attention to that. And it turns out that someone else who is sort of affected by it more directly than I am, and who thought, you know, there is a right way and a wrong way of going about this, and maybe someone should say something calmly about this. Maybe someone should be a voice of reason, or lack thereof, right as the vlog title is here, decided to step up on this. And of all people, it was Chuck Wendig. Again, the man whose opinion I didn't think I would ever care to see again. But after one of the viewers of this vlog, Amy, made the suggestion, hey, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on the Continue Legends thing with the billboard and all, and Chuck Wendig's comments. I was like, Chuck Wendig's comments? What? Went and looked them up, and you know, I think they bear some discussion here. So let's take a look at what he said, because I think it does bear repeating in a bit of discussion or a bit of elaboration here. You can find this over at terribleminds.com in a post from April 20th, 2016. It's entitled An Open Letter to the Bring Back Legends Star Wars Fans. He says, starting out with a note, none of this post represents my publishers or the Star Wars universe, and I have literally no special knowledge or power in that regard. All the opinions below represent me, not Del Rey, not Lucasfilm or Disney, just little old me. Again, Chuck Wendig writing here. Wendig says, Hi, Expanded Universe / Legends fans. It's me, your pal, Chuck Wendig. If your emails and tweets and YouTube videos about me are any indication, you care very little for me, and that's fine. I wish you'd be a little nicer about it, but hey, you do you. Again, I would argue that a lot of that negativity, or at least some of that negativity, comes from his reaction to the negativity to the book and the interactions on social media. The Chuck. Now, here's Chuck Wendig, not the Chuck, speaking, and That's when things sound a lot more rational, but in the cacophony of social media, at least some of that negativity and some of the ire towards him, he did certainly bring upon himself. But not all of it. Some of it was just people being crazy. I wanted you to know, he continues, that I saw that thing you did with the billboard, and really, it's pretty cool. It got you press. It's a way to demonstrate what you love in a fairly positive way. It shows the power of crowdfunding. One could argue that you might have made the same impression or better if you organized the money to go to charity. Force for Change, after all, is a Star Wars-based charity, but what do I know? Thing is, what you did is pretty nifty, and it shows the collective power of an engaged, interested fandom. Total agreement that this was a positive way of showing it in a way that shows that there is an engagement there. I'm not sure I would agree that it would have made as much of an impression if it were a charitable thing, because this is somewhat of a unique thing for fans to have done, whereas fans do charitable things quite often, all the time. Force for Change, aside from maybe naming your group based on Continue Legends or something, when you get the money together to donate to a cause, I'm not sure they're going to necessarily see that as specific to your cause if you're one of the Continue Legends people. So, in that sense, I'm not sure I agree, but the broader sense, I certainly do. He continues, I talked about this a bit on Twitter yesterday, and I have been accused now and many times before of somehow being a Legends hater. Also a prequel hater, apparently. I don't hate the prequels, and I don't hate Legends, or what was once the expanded universe. I love Zahn's novels and stat polls, though I never really read much deeper than that because, well, for me, there were other books to read. I didn't want to be reading Star Wars novels only, and I was a pretty diverse reader across genres. But some folks were and still are fairly deep into the Legend/EU line of stories. And those are stories that linked books and comics and games in a not quite canon flavored way. Now, there's already going to be people like, not quite canon, that's bullshit! Again, remember, the expanded universe or Legends continuity had levels of canon by the time it was finally delineated. G, T, C, S, N. And only G-level and T-level canon were thought of as coming from Lucas himself. That's why those are the only levels that were pulled over into the story group's new canon when things were shifted within about the last year and a half to 2 years, right? The stuff that was in the comics, the novels, the video games were always C-level canon, or were eventually labeled as C-level canon. They were always thought of as less than Lucas's vision, and that Lucas could trample over it and change it at any time, like what happened with the prequels and the Clone Wars. So when he says not quite canon, I know canon gets used in a lot of different ways. When referring to Legends, it was misused a lot. It was alternately used, and a lot of times the uses of it conflicted. What he's saying, though, is not all G-level stuff. That he's talking about stuff that's not necessarily coming from Lucas or Lucasfilm per se. It's coming from the licensees, in which case he is absolutely correct. And that's honestly kind of great. He says, I want to tell you that I get it. I understand why you want more. Stories have power over us. Star Wars in particular is a storytelling universe that has really enveloped our own. This is pop culture that has threaded its way into our narrative DNA. It's part of us. The EU came up at a time when we thought we weren't getting more Star Wars stories. That universe seemed dead, inert, donezo, and suddenly here comes the start of a whole new universe of stories, where once there were 3 movies, suddenly there were dozens, eventually hundreds of books, and comics, and games. Again, that context is important. Remember, the EU really kicked off in 1991. We were still 6 years away from getting the special editions. We were still 8 years away from the Phantom Menace at that point. There was no sense that prequels were ever going to come, and at that point, not even that special editions would come, for better or worse. That single bulk of narrative material, he continues, outweighs most other universes. One can argue that it even outweighs what we get with the films, at least in terms of sheer storytelling girth. Some of the books were great. Some of them, yeah, okay, maybe not so great. But it was a huge legacy, a massive obelisk of material, and it's worthy of worship. And then it came crashing down. And note here, when he talks about the storytelling girth, that is a big part of why a lot of folks who are fans of Legends, as I am, have trouble with the idea of a new continuity based just on the films, because to them, Star Wars was never just the films, because they got into it once the EU had started, and it was this idea that Star Wars was this broad storytelling universe that just had a core of the films, whereas to those who were around before that and those who try to see it a little more rationally, I think, the films being at the core is what makes Star Wars no matter what continuity it's in, whereas what's around it, the books and comics, define what continuity separate from other continuities we're looking at, whether it's Legends or canon or whatnot. So he says, and then it came crashing down. That universal lineage, that massive branch of the Star Wars storytelling tree, it broke off, fell to the ground, and you feel like Disney wood-chipped it and shoved the splinters in a box marked Legends. Some books ended up canceled, some games too, maybe even comics. Fade to black, and then the curtain parts again, and now there are new movies and new books. Aftermath. His interjection there, not mine. And they either ignore the expanded universe stories or they pick ideas and characters from them to use now or later. Accurate, at least in terms of the wood chipping thing in the way that some perceive it. It's hard for some Star Wars fans who are fans of Legends to acknowledge Legends as a separate continuity from canon that is still whole, and think of it instead as, by not being part of canon, all these stories have been thrown in the trash or a wood chipper, as the case may be. I would argue that, we need to calm down because those stories still exist as their own continuity. It's just not growing much. The Old Republic and stories related to that, of course, are still growing Legends. I get it, he says. It's the same feeling when a TV show you love gets canceled, looking at you, Firefly, or when one of the big comic companies takes an entire universe and ends it, or changes it, or reboots it. Shit, I get pissed when Target stops selling cereal I like, or I discover that a t-shirt or sneaker I like is discontinued. Sneakers, I mean, shit! If Nike or Reebok release a sneaker and you wear it and you like it, next season that sneaker is already on a burning trash pile in the Pacific Ocean and replaced with the next upgraded model, and that model sucks because it's not the shoe you jolly well fucking liked in the first place. And now your brand loyalty for that company is cut off at the knees because they stopped making the thing you like. Welcome to fickle consumerism, right? And those reading this up to this point, because of his choice of phrasing, might be thinking that he's being negative against those who love Legends, despite his phrasing of what he's saying, making it something where he's giving you ways that he can relate to what Legends fans are going through. But this, I think, is where his comments start to become very clear, very logical, and things that those who are fans of Legends and the part of the Continue Legends movement should really probably be taking a moment to listen to. Because there's a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, just like in just about anything else. And it takes some intellectual honesty and some realization of what positive and negative things are being done or can be done. So, he continues. So let me just say, I support you. Yes, that was Chuck Wendig saying, I support those who want to continue Legends, okay? Just saying. I hope you get what you want. I have literally no power to make it happen, and I'm sure they wouldn't hire me for the job anyway, because if they hired me to write the expanded universe, at least a half dozen of you would probably burn down Disneyland. But I'm all for more stories in the world, and I'm certainly all for more Star Wars stories. Here's me, giving you a thumbs up with a big smile and a glint of hope in my eye. But of course, I have some caveats. And I would think that these caveats are pretty clear and pretty obvious, but they deserve saying. The caveats. Number one, if it does happen, I'd expect it to be a limited series. One last trilogy sort of thing. Again, I have no insider information in this regard, and I have no reason to believe this is even happening. I'm just saying, if it does happen, I would expect it to take the form of a bone thrown in your direction rather than a revivified, or revivified? Always have trouble pronouncing that. Legends directive. I've got to agree with that. At least not in the near future if we were to see Legends continue in a bigger way. It's not like they're going to come in and say, okay, well, all this canon stuff, we're moving that aside, and now our primary publishing line is Legends again, and this huge explosion of new material. That I don't see. Even if they were to go forward and start producing Legends materials again heavily with the Legends label on them, I still don't see them producing more Legends than canon. So from the standpoint of volume, if it does return, the volume would certainly be smaller, I would think. Number two. It probably also won't happen at all. You need to prepare yourselves for that. Important point here. If Continue Legends does not result in more Legends stories, we need to be okay with that. We need to at least be able to say, you know what, that sucks, I hate it, fine, I'm not reading any more Star Wars. Fine! But accept it. There's a point at which denial reaches a point where it's causing bad reactions from people. It's the same thing as the people who couldn't get over Chewbacca being killed in Vector Prime, so they sent death threats to R.A. Salvatore. You're nuts. That was the thing that actually had me drop the very first F-bomb on my first podcast, Chrono Radio, when responding to the people who sent death threats to R.A. Salvatore when Chewbacca was killed. What the hell? We have to be able to be rational people and realize that sometimes we're not going to get what we want. We might be pining for the return of Firefly, but it's not happening. We're not going to get what we want. We can either drive ourselves nuts with it and be douchebags about it constantly anytime Firefly is brought up, or we can love what we got, step back and be rational about the fact that we're not going to be getting anything new and just perhaps still hope for something more to come later. But there's a difference between hopeful optimism and being a dick to everyone who disagrees with you on whether or not something should continue. Two very different things. One is positive, the other makes you into a piece of male genitalia. Wow, I mentioned genitalia a couple times now in this episode. I'm not entirely sure where this is going. Maybe it's the fact that I had to put the warning on it because he's dropping F-bombs and such. I don't know. Back to his caveats here. He said, it probably won't happen at all. You need to prepare yourselves for that. The reasons it probably won't happen are many. For instance, A, it takes a lot of ecosystem to fire up a new publishing line, and that's sort of what's happening here. It takes staff, it takes money, it takes time out of a publishing schedule. Publishing is slow. It's already understaffed. I speak from experience. This isn't a case of just flip the switch and bring back Legends. Mountains have to be moved. Personal experience on this, stepping away from what he's said. It's a huge amount of time, especially when dealing with a smaller press. Like when I was working with Grail Quest Books on the Wars novellas, took a long time to get out. It took months from the time that I put in the first pitch of my story Equals and Opposites for Star Wars Tales number 21 before it actually showed up in the comic. And even then, after it was finished and ready to go, it still took a while before it showed up in the actual comic itself, with the art and everything all completed. Publishing is not as fast a process as it sounds like, and I think the more that we get into the idea of people being able to self-publish, we can do things like creating our own ebooks and just put it out there very quickly, it's easy to forget how long professional publishing, especially when you're dealing with a franchise with different levels of approvals that have to be gone through, actually takes. It takes a long time. When I wrote that story for Star Wars Tales, what I wrote had to be approved by Jeremy Barlow, by Jonathan Rinsler, and all back up and down the line. It had to be dealt with at Dark Horse level and at Lucasfilm level in order to be able to be passed on to the next stage of the process, which was James Reyes doing the art, and then he had to go through the different levels of approvals on the artwork. So it is a slow, grinding process with a lot of moving parts. That makes it difficult to start up or restart any publishing line, especially when you're trying to do it alongside an existing publishing line. He continues with B. Right now, Disney has a pretty sweet thing going, and seeing them switch gears, even temporarily, would surprise me. The new movie did huge numbers. The books are selling well, and despite some who want to assure me that Aftermath did not sell well, it really did. It sold big. It lingered on the bestseller charts. I have a very small royalty percentage compared to my other books. Most tie-in work offers no royalties. And even with that truncated royalty, I just got a royalty check that was bigger than some of my advances. I don't say that to brag. Okay, humble brag maybe. But just to clarify, the book sold well and continues to sell well even now. So it's hard imagining why Disney would have interest in suddenly returning to stories that don't connect to the larger narrative. I'd say, well, it's connected to a larger narrative. Legends is the larger narrative. Yeah, not right now. As Star Wars is hitting more mainstream audiences through the form of movies, which was its primary form, as far as a franchise goes, its core form, people are going to be looking more for things that tie into these new movies and that continuity than older continuities that don't necessarily connect. It's the same reason why you see Marvel shifting a lot of their comics to adding in characters like Phil Coulson or the Black Nick Fury into the regular Marvel universe so that it can be something that reflects more of the Marvel films that are getting so much attention these days. It's just kind of the nature of the beast when it comes to entertainment franchises. C. That larger narrative is actually part of the problem for Legends. It's quite a big deal that at present, everything coming out regarding Star Wars is connected. That's not true really with anything else, I don't believe, at least not at this scale. It is all, relatively speaking, canon. To suddenly introduce these other stories that aren't connected opens Disney up to branding confusion. People yelling at them on social about how they thought Han and Leia had only one kid, and is Rey actually Jaina, and wait, is Kylo and the Knights of Ren in these books, and hold up, is Mara Jade Rey's mom? You're fans, so you understand the difference, but the average reader doesn't see the difference. They have a limited view of canon and think that if they pick up a new Star Wars book, it'll probably connect to the movies and the other new books. When that fails, that creates disappointment. I think I brought this up actually back when dealing with the what other choices did they have. Creating something where they'd have two separate publishing lines going forward would create confusion. I think part of that confusion, though, is because Legends is labeled Legends. There's no label on the canonical stuff. If there were labels on both that made it very easy to tell which is which, I don't think there'd be that much confusion. It'd be like, Transformers Armada versus Transformers Robots in Disguise versus Transformers Generation 1. People would see the label and be like, oh, I know exactly which one I'm picking up. Even though you'd still have that confusion perhaps about the movies. But from a standpoint of right now, with Legends labeled and the other stuff not, and previous printings of Legends not called Legends, confusion would definitely arise. Absolutely. He continues. D. It bears repeating. Disney probably wants to avoid branding confusion at all costs, at least until the movies are out and that part of the story has been told. E. You may not have the numbers to demonstrate support for the continuation of Legends. The Indiegogo campaign had 146 backers and raised $4,784. No small feat, and really cool. But 146 people is not enough to support a line of books, and 1,146 people isn't enough. And maybe 11,146 people wouldn't do it either. They want to sell 100,000 copies of a book. This goes back to something that Mark and I have talked about on Beyond the Films quite a bit. As vocal as we are, and as invested as we are, we fans of Legends, we are not the mainstream. We are not the main bulk of consumers out there buying Star Wars materials. That is a much more mainstream audience. Those are people seeing the movies and picking up one or two things, not everything. There are people who are interested in individual stories, perhaps not the giant, broader continuity, whether we're talking canon or Legends. We are a minority within fandom, but we are a loud minority, so a lot of times we forget we're a minority, but we are a minority. F. A lot of fan-demanded projects actually don't earn out. Serenity eventually made it out on DVD, but in the theater, it was a bomb. When a TV show comes back based on fan demand, it often ends up getting canceled again anyway, because the reality is core fandom isn't enough to support big, meaty narrative universes. Fandom, by its nature, represents the most excited members, sure, but most big properties thrive on non-fans, people who don't want to read 100 other books to understand this one that they just bought. Narrower niche properties can live on the support of fandom, but Star Wars is not a narrow niche property. Number 3. If it doesn't happen, I might encourage you to summon peace with that reality. He's kind of going back to that whole idea, but elaborating on it in this case. There does come a point when your energy can be best spent elsewhere. Share your love with other great stories, even if they're not inside Star Wars. This isn't me smacking your hand and saying, just get over it, losers. But it is vital to recognize the reality that you neither own nor control this stuff. And you still have hundreds of great legend stories that you can still enjoy. That's huge. And I know it's not fair, but life is frequently full of unfair things, and part of our skill set as human beings is how we inoculate ourselves against disappointment. Couldn't have said it better myself. Number 4. Also, hey, you can sort of take ownership and control of the Legends continuity through the power of fan fiction. Fan fiction informed me, and I don't look down on it, nor should anybody. It's a great way to be creative and also continue exploring a narrative universe that either left you behind or you left behind. It allows you to continue engagement with that world. So rad. This I gotta disagree with. This is that idea of personal canon and fanon that to me is antithetical to the idea of continuity. Yes, you can create your own fan fiction, but we could have done that all along. I did that with some audio dramas, Second Strike, Always in Motion, the anthology series, not a movie series, an audio drama series, Dreamscape, Doubts Cast, and all that. But while that is fun to do, and you can connect with other writers even and make something bigger out of it, or connect all your stories together, that's still different than having something that is officially a continuation, a licensed work from some licensee that works under the auspices of the official owner of the franchise. Not to mention the fact that even now, with Legends basically sitting off to the side doing very little, we still don't get to come in and use personal canon to decide what counts and what doesn't, and basically make a mess out of that or add to that continuity and claim that what we're adding is official. Their GTCSN structure still stands for Legends. It's just that now for the story group canon, the new continuity, it's all supposed to be one level of canon. The rules still apply in the previous case. I definitely don't look at this. He's almost suggesting that this is almost like Star Wars Legends has entered the public domain, and it's just a free-for-all of who wants to do what with it, and that is not the case. Fan fiction is fan fiction. It's a great creative outlet. It's great practice for perhaps professional writing someday. It's a great expression of love for a saga, but nothing ever makes that official. The final caveat, and may I say, this is something a lot of folks on the fringe of Continue Legends desperately need to hear and adhere to. Many of you are nice and passionate. Thanks for being fans, if not of mine or my work, then of Star Wars in general. It's a universe under a big, big tent. That's a good thing. Sometimes, though, in fandom, passion becomes tainted, shot through with the sepsis of frustration. And further, sometimes fandom attracts people who are, maybe not the finest specimens of humanity. And when that happens, harassment occurs, as it has occurred amongst the Bring Back Legends movement. You need to get your house in order. What I mean is, harassment is not a good way to get what you want. It is, in fact, a very good way to be dismissed. It is a great way to be seen as bullies, and nobody wants to give you more Legends if the way you get it has been protracted campaigns of harassment or even by rogue members of your campaigns and Facebook groups demonstrating very bad behavior. Some other fans who operate fan sites have felt harassed and bullied. For instance, a post at Tashi Station where one of the members of Tashi Station stepped away for a while. I've seen it in person. I've seen it online. I've seen what happens at the Star Wars Books public Facebook page, and whoever runs that page has the patience of a saint and is hopefully paid a merciful 6 figures. Threats to spoil The Force Awakens came out of an expanded universe group. This is not unknown. This is real. I know I've been on the end of harassment, not just for the content of Aftermath, but sometimes because I am somehow held responsible for having ended the EU, or because I'm not Timothy Zahn, or because I supposedly hate Legends, or I get emails. People tweet angrily at me every week. I get hate and harassment flooded in my direction just because I wrote a book. It's not awesome, and it's certainly not endearing. The public relations manager of the Indiegogo campaign for the billboard made a video about me. He gives a link to it, which I don't even know what to say about that except I hope he's okay. It is not his only video of dubious content. Pause and go back. Again, I disagree with some of the context of this because he's making it sound as though he is not even remotely responsible for any of the backlash that he got when this guy was on social media fanning the flames and responding in kind to many of the people who were attacking him. So, whatever, but what he's saying here, I mean, even if we take out the fact that some of this was something that he was sort of, poking the bear, the sheer volume of it to him and to others in a harassing way is not going to do any good for the Continue Legends movement, and it's definitely not going to do any good for the individuals involved, because it's like anything else, right? You take the Republicans. Republicans, I know, are generally good people, but there are far-right people way out on the fringe who are nut jobs. Democrats, I know, are generally really good people. On the end, though, there's a fringe on the left that are nut jobs. There are nut jobs in every group, and the nut jobs, unfortunately, are usually some of the loudest people. As I sit back and wonder if that counts me because I have a vlog and a podcast and so forth. But people on the fringe often are the defining people for a movement. People in the Republican Party, for the most part, don't agree with some of the outlandish things being said by, for instance, to bring him up again, Donald Trump. People on the right, generally, if they are anti-abortion or pro-life, generally aren't for killing abortion doctors. But those are the types of things that you see in the news a lot, and that frames the narrative of what a Republican is, whether that's actually true or not. Same thing you could say on the left with, they're all about abortion on demand, etc., and all that kind of stuff. There is a reality of the bulk, of the majority. There is a fringe minority group in any larger group, but unfortunately those fringes are usually the ones who get the grease. They are the squeaky wheels getting the grease, getting all the attention. In order for any movement to really get positive traction, there has to be some reining in of the douchebags on the edges. To continue, it's not fun. It's not funny. It's harmful to your cause and to the victims who endure. And I know that it's not all Legends fans, but that doesn't really salve the sting of harassment that both fans and professionals have felt. I hope you get more books. Sincerely, I cheer you on. More stories is more goodness. I also hope some of you stop your worst behaviors and your worst members, because they have dominated this conversation and poisoned your efforts from within. It's time to grow up and be better. Demonstrate your desires with love and outreach, not hate and spite. Even if that doesn't get you what you want, it at least keeps the slate clean and ensures that nobody feels harassed. Best of luck. And with that, his blog post again at Terrible Minds ends. And I think that is an incredibly important message. I say something similarly to a degree in the afterword that you'll be seeing in the third of those Sequart Star Wars anthologies, when I got a chance to write the afterword opposite an introduction by Timothy Zahn, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, there's a positive way to do this. There's a negative way to do this. And those who are doing it in a negative way are causing those of us who love Legends and want to see it continue but aren't on the fringe, it's causing us to be painted with a similar brush. I'm not big on the whole continue Legends thing, at least as far as activity goes. I love Legends, I love canon, I love Star Wars. I want to see continuation of Star Wars in any form, and I can handle the idea there being two main continuities that we see and one that's in prominence. Okay, whatever. My buddy Mark Herleman, who I'm with on Star Wars Beyond the Films, and who I was with as a panelist on the Star Wars Report's Rebels Roundtable that has since ended, he is a lot more on the pro-continue Legends side of things, in that he wants to see certain things especially come back, particularly certain characters come back, even if it's just names coming back in canon, because he has children named after these characters. Eventually, if my wife and I have a son, hopefully we will, we've already agreed, we're going to name that child Cade. So there is a personal connection here, and Mark is very active in some fan communities that I'm just not as active in from a social media standpoint and whatnot, and he gets crap all the time. He gets messages being sent to him telling him to rein in people from other sites he's never heard of, because they're the ones out there bashing things in canon, bashing Disney, bashing authors as part of proclaiming themselves continue Legends, and here's Mark, who wants a continuation of Legends and uses the hashtag, sitting there saying, the hell do these guys have to do with me? Well, painted with the same brush, unfortunately. So I never, months ago, would have ever thought that I would say this. But you know what? I think that Chuck Wendig, not the Chuck, but Chuck Wendig, the rational professional who wrote that blog, I think he's absolutely right. I think that it's unlikely to happen, that we need to be ready for that if that is the case, that if it does happen, it won't be in a major way, and that there's a lot of branding confusion worry that is at the heart of not continuing Legends, and more importantly, that, you know what? Stop being assholes! Try to do this in a positive way, because generally, if you're an asshole, nobody wants anything to do with you. And all you're going to do is hurt the cause that you're supporting. Get out there and do positive things, like a billboard, like charity, the way that he mentioned it, or just being positive and sharing your love of Legends in a way that is non-abrasive. But don't go around attacking people. Don't go around harassing people. Don't go around tearing people down who happen to disagree with you. Again, it's time for a little bit of civility in fandom, as I talked about in a previous vlog here. And thankfully, it seems as though the majority of Star Wars fans are doing just that, being civil to one another. But unfortunately, there are people out there loudly proclaiming to the heavens that they are idiots, or they are jerks, or they are douchebags, assholes, whatever you want to call them, and that they don't care about civility. They only want what they want. And you know what? Given that we've been through a political season in which that seems to be a big motivating factor for a lot of people, maybe we as Star Wars fans can be better than the society around us would allow us to be. Just because you can be a prick and you may not get called on it, doesn't mean it's the right thing to be a prick. Sometimes we have to do right just because it's the right thing to do. The measure of a person and their goodness isn't what they do when they're being watched. It's what they do when they're not being watched, or when they don't have any controls over them. Use your free speech, but you know what? What you say will reflect on you. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you all for watching. I, again, am blown away by the fact that I heartily agree with Chuck Wendig. This may be reshaping my perceptions of the man. But thank you all for watching. I'd, of course, welcome your comments below, and we'll be back with another vlog very soon. May the Force be with you all. Even if you are one of the jerks, because we want you as part of our reindeer games. We just want you to chill.